The Grumman F6F Hellcat, a World War II fighter, designed and built for one purpose: to defeat the Japanese Zero. A job it did so well that within a year, it turned the tide of war. It put an end to Japan's dominance in the skies, making it possible for U.S. bombers to reach the Japanese homeland. The Hellcat was a plane confident in battle, one pilots could rely on to bring them home.
It's a famous airplane for its kill ratio, one of those bloody terms of World War II, all that, where I don't think it's even been exceeded today. And the veterans that flew this that I've talked to numerous times just say this airplane is just an absolute delight to fly, and you can fight with it, and it would always bring you home.
Today, the relationship is reversed, and it's the plane that depends on a group of pilots. One of those pilots is Ken Shugart. Shugart spent the last 12 years restoring this F6F Hellcat, literally bringing her back to life.
This is the first full restoration of a Hellcat that I've done. I've worked on two other ones as far as just maintenance and repair and re-inspection, relicensing in the past. But this is by far really the biggest project I've had to date, as far as just a massive undertaking and the amount of hours and time and logistics of trying to find all the parts, pieces, and whatnot to put it all back together.
The day she's expected to return to the sky for the first time in a very long time.
We hope that all goes well. It should. It should do everything that Grumman designed, engineered, and constructed it to do. I really just followed their guidelines and put it all back together with the help of several other people financially in order to do that. So, yeah, we hope that it'll go well.
Say, if you're looking for me, I'm over here. No, further over this way. Right there, that's me.
This 1944 Grumman promotional film gave the F6F Hellcat a voice.
The first F6F ever made. And you can call me Hellcat for short. A lot of people are going to do that.
A voice and a will to fly. In reality, it was the will of the war effort that put this Hellcat and 250,000 other planes into the sky. Today, precious few of these planes remain, and it is still human will that puts them back into the sky. They are reborn in places such as this, brought back to life by the hands of men who care. Their job is to defy time. This is the Ezel Aviation Hangar in Breckenridge, Texas. It could pass for a museum. Every nook and cranny is filled with a variety of rare airplanes. In one corner, a P-51 Mustang, looking less like a fierce fighter than a plucked bird. Out in front, a Russian Yak ready for test flight. Next to it is a Hawker Sea Fury, one day closer to having a new engine in place. And off to the left, with wings tucked up in a rest, a Grumman F6F-5 Hellcat. It's one of only 26 in the world. By the end of the day, she may prove to be one of only 9 that are airworthy. With its spit polish finish, this airplane looks like it could have just rolled out of the Grumman aircraft factory.
We put it all back to the way it was when it left Bethpage, color and everything, with all the independent flaps, the spring tabs on the ailerons. It's grade A cotton fabric on the covering. The most difficult part of it, I would say, was the fuselage from the instrument panel bulkhead back. Virtually all that in there we had to rebuild, replace.
That day, however, occurred back in 1944. In spite of its brand new appearance, this Hellcat hasn't flown in many years. Ken Shugart spent the last dozen years of his life rebuilding this Hellcat for the Confederate Air Force. Today, he hopes to see his work completed. Its wings, the longest of any World War II fighter, were clipped.
Collar type self-sealing flap. When it's retracted, it streamlines itself. All of my micarta strip in here, the rubber seal that goes up above it. It's a very basic airplane, but it is pretty unique and very well engineered on that point. It has blow-up flaps. The way I understand from talking to the pilots that flew these, you took off and landed with full flap. You could leave the flap selector all the way down, and once it attained 150 knots, the flaps would automatically retract, but they're armed, ready to come back down if you drop below.
It was only the beginning.
It was deteriorated pretty bad. When it was entered at Reno as a racer, they demilitarized it as far as taking out all the weight they could. And then at one point it did have a rear seat back there. So the spine part of its structure and the bulkhead immediately behind the pilot's head was completely disassembled. There's no structure there, it wasn't strong enough. All the oil cooler, the engine mount, everything, clean, prepped, primed, painted, put all back together with all new hardware. When they had done all that stuff for Reno, in order for them to save weight and all that, they had taken the counterbalance weights off of both the aileron, the elevator, and the rudder. And when I finally had to get the blueprints to find out all those dimensions, Grumman said it really spoke well for the airplane because it shouldn't be able to fly like that.
Shugart's task was to return a radically modified Hellcat to its original form. To do that, he started at the source, the Grumman plant in Bethpage, New York.
Grumman Aerospace in Bethpage, New York were very helpful. This is one of their most famous airplanes due to its kill ratio during the war. And so they were very helpful as far as paper, blueprints, everything on microfilm. I went to Bethpage.
But before Shugart could put this Hellcat back together, he had to take it apart, bolt by bolt.
So you're about 2 years in the teardown and all that. Then you got to build the house first and then put all the furniture in. So all the structural work was done, and then loaded it all up with its flight controls and components. And
9 years later, the finished product would have impressed Roy Grumman himself. A test flight was scheduled, but the plane never left the ground. There was an accident on takeoff roll. Afterward, the owner sent the aircraft here. Nelson Ezel and his crew spent the better part of a year repairing the resulting damage.
Well, the center attach points in here was probably displaced about 1.5 inches or so. So essentially it just wrecked all the structural components in there. And what we did, we took all the skin off. You can see the discolor in the paint a little there. About 4 stations from the horizontal leading edge there, all that skin was off and everything back, all the horizontals came off. Replaced the spar in this horizontal and repaired the one in this one. The spar in this left elevator was repaired, and the vertical, or the rudder was repaired, vertical spar and the vertical fin, or the rudder. And all the attach points, and then we had to build all the ribs for from forward to the horizontal aft, all had to be replaced.
The men at Ezel Aviation are some of the best in the country at what they do. They rebuild and repair aircraft so easily and so often, it's almost become routine.
So it just takes time, you know, and it was, but it was, you know, it was a nice job. Fuselages is always relative to wings are easier to repair because you have a lot better access for as working room. Triple lever, you need 3 more guys besides yourself.
Now Ezel had another job to do before the test pilot arrives. Check the engine one last time. It hasn't run in a couple of weeks, and he wants to make sure everything still works.
A lot of gratification to seeing something go back together and then watch it fly away. And it's neat. You know, we enjoy what we do, and that's why we do what we do, I guess. We're fortunate enough to be able to do that. So, is it clear up there? Clear!
This type of engine check is routine. Ezel watches the oil pressure, the engine temperature, and makes sure everything is firing properly. He studies the instruments, but he also listens. The sound an engine makes can tell an experienced pilot or mechanic just about as much as any gauge. And this one sounds good.
I'll spit a little bit. But it ran good.
I guess that's fairly normal.
Yeah, that's normal for a round engine. Anything's been sitting over a couple of weeks. Yeah, ready for the driver.
More than a half-century ago, the Grumman F6F Hellcat dominated the skies over the Pacific.
Our fighter pilots have improved with practice, with the confidence that comes from experience.
By the end of World War II, the Hellcat was the heart of the U.S. carrier force. But in 1941, when America was literally blown into the war, the plane existed only on drawing boards. After World War I, the United States retreated inside its own borders. It turned a deaf ear to the sounds of war coming from Europe and Asia.
Old Japan was primitive. The history of the new Japan is a story of successful copying.
It was much easier to believe that the Japanese were an inferior race, that Japan was incapable of doing anything more than copy Western technology.
On a tradition of peace and love of the soil, the new Japan suddenly turned its back and copied our locomotives, our planes.
In truth, Japan made great strides in military aviation, while the United States put aviation on the slow track. When war broke out, Japan already had a fighter a generation ahead. That plane was the A6M. That plane was the Zero. In the days and months following Pearl Harbor, the United States learned just how far behind it had fallen. The Zero received its combat initiation over China in 1940. Flying their lightweight and highly maneuverable aircraft, Japanese pilots could outturn, outclimb, and outdistance any airplane they faced. During the first year of the war, the U.S. Navy chased Japan throughout the Pacific. Air and sea battles raged from the Coral Sea to Midway and Guadalcanal. The Grumman F4F Wildcat bore the brunt of that fighting duty. It was a tough little plane, but no match for the far superior Japanese Zero. Stopping them demanded a new aircraft. The Grumman F6F Hellcat was tailor-made to beat the Zero, to defeat the Japanese. Grumman built the Hellcat with its enemy in mind. They studied the Zero. They talked to pilots who had flown against the Japanese. They used that knowledge to design and build the F6F.
Here in engineering, they had plenty of voices in their ears, like that of Commander Butch O'Hare, who said, "Give us something that will go upstairs faster." So they designed a motor mount to harness 2,000 horsepower, enough to pull a half-mile-long freight train.
The Hellcat was built around the same engine that powered the more famous F4U Corsair.
I was born to fly. Funny, even before one's ever been up, one knows a thing like that, and I know. I'm cut out to fly better and climb faster than anyone else, and to take off with the shortest run possible, to have plenty of nerve and skill.
Its sturdy gear made the Hellcat ideally suited to pounding carrier landings. Its folding wings meant that tiny flight decks could accommodate more planes, and it had a short takeoff roll critical to carrier operations.
Yes, sir, that's where I'm going, up there in the sky. I know it isn't always as beautiful as it is right now, or as safe and quiet. But just the same, that's all I've ever wanted to do. I was born to fly.
The first Hellcat made its maiden flight in the spring of 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor. By July of 1943, 16 Hellcat squadrons were operating in the Pacific. From the outside, the Hellcat was unmistakably a Grumman aircraft, but its characteristics were more like the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt than anything Grumman had ever built. It was a heavy aircraft with an empty weight of more than 9,000 pounds and a takeoff weight of more than 15,000. The Hellcat had a stubby, pear-shaped fuselage, and designers positioned its center of gravity so that in level flight, it flew in a tail-down attitude. Still, it was an inherently stable aircraft. The Hellcat was faster than the Zero and could outclimb it. This gave the new plane the advantage of surprising its target from above. From this vantage point, it could unleash the full power of its 650 caliber machine guns. When Grumman was finished with the F6F, the only advantage the Zero still held was its slow speed turning ability. Between 1942 and 1945, Grumman built more than 12,000 of the pugnacious little planes. Naval aviators took their new fighter into combat for the first time in 1943. On August 31st, they raided the Japanese bases in the Marcus Islands. It turned into a training exercise for the new Hellcat pilots.
As our first fighters race in toward Marcus Island, they stay low, hoping to escape detection by the enemy's radar. Then they climb suddenly and dive, surprise strafing attack on the enemy's airstrips.
The Japanese were caught off guard, unable to launch any of their aircraft in retaliation.
The enemy's picket boats and supply ships offshore are thoroughly strafed.
The U.S. dominated in the dawn attack. The Hellcat's renown as a fighter was established almost from the beginning. For the remainder of the war, it was the Navy's primary shipboard aircraft. If fast carriers were there, so was the Hellcat. One engagement, more than any other, contributed to its reputation. The Battle of the Philippine Sea. It happened in late June 1944. Part of the U.S. Fifth Fleet was deployed to the Mariana Islands. There they would protect U.S. amphibious landings on Saipan. Over the course of 2 days, American and Japanese planes met in battle. It was an air campaign that favored the Japanese in number. It would become known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Accounts vary, but it's believed Japan lost roughly 275 aircraft in battle. Of the nearly 300 Hellcats that flew, only 25 were shot down. The battle did more than prove the Hellcat's dominance. It left the U.S. with a massive advantage in carrier air force. The Japanese fleet never recovered, and the Marianas fell to U.S. forces. From there, the U.S. would launch its strategic bombing campaign, the campaign that would lead to the end of the war. The Hellcat's role in World War II cannot be underestimated. This Grumman plane claims 75% of all kills credited to carrier pilots. More Navy aces flew Hellcats than any other plane. They established a kill-to-loss ratio of 19 to 1. The Hellcat's been described as a blue-collar airplane. It went into battle, rolled up its sleeves, and got the job done, no matter what that job was. Its primary role was a daylight fighter, but it was also a competent bomber escort. And with the addition of radar, the Hellcat was the Navy's preferred night fighter.
Yeah, I shot all these pictures myself. See, this is the wing of the Hellcat right there. That's a Fletcher-class destroyer. That's our radar equipment, the airborne intercept radar that we used.
Tom Donaher has made more than a passing acquaintance with Hellcats and with night operations. In the summer of 1945, a young Donaher joined the Marine Night Fighter Squadron 543 in Okinawa. He became one of the Nighthawks.
Our planes had these, what they call flame hiders on the exhaust where they stuck out to kind of squash the exhaust flames down to where the enemy planes couldn't see them very as much. This is the interior, that's the actual instrument panel of my airplane right there, Foxnan 15. That's the radar scope there. It was about 3 inches in diameter. All the controls were along the right side of the cockpit on the console.
Flying under the cover of darkness, this new technology was critical to their success.
Our main mission was what they call night caps, night combat air patrol. They'd send us up and you'd have a sector. This sector would be for one radar station. We'd go up and cruise at whatever altitude they would send you to, because they'd know about what altitudes to expect either the kamikazes or the bombers to be coming in from. Then when they would have a customer coming in your sector, well then they'd start on a cutoff vector, trying to get you to meet up as closely as possible, but with a little tail chase.
The radar station alerted the Hellcat pilot to a possible enemy aircraft. Then the pilot used his own airborne radar to maneuver close enough for a positive ID. With that, he was cleared to fire.
Of course, I'd only been there for 10 days, something like that, when I, was vectored onto the first airplane and went, and very handily and easily, the plane just, the first few shots I shot, the plane just blew up right in my face. Then about 20 minutes later, they said they had another customer for me and vectored me out. Got in behind him, and it was another Betty. And of course, same thing, they all weave around as soon as the guy in the tail turret there is watching. When they'd be getting close to Okinawa, they knew they were going to have some problems waiting for them. Anyway, I went up, and the next couple of bursts, his right engine caught on fire. And he kept on flying, but he was going down.
Danaher got credit for 2 kills on his first nightcap. His next encounter came just a few days later, August 7th, 1945. At just under 25,000 feet, he was directed to a Japanese Betty. Official Marine Corps reports say Danaher hit the intruding plane in the starboard engine. The pilot lost control of his burning aircraft and crashed into the ocean. It was 11:40 p.m. local time.
And then this fellow is Red Jennings, Bill Jennings, who still lives right over here by Fort Worth. And he was the Marine pilot that he shot down the last airplane that was shot down by a Marine pilot in World War II.
3.5 hours later, another hit, this one by Danaher's friend Bill Jennings, a Japanese Tony. It was the last Marine night fighter kill. The newspapers placed Danaher in history as well. His bomber kill was listed as the last by a Marine night fighter in the Ryukyu Islands.
So we had a stand down the next morning. No more fighting. So far as the air part of it was concerned, the war was over.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored.
Danaher soon found himself among the occupation forces in Japan.
That was our mess hall. Of course, these were all Japanese buildings that you see now. And that's an old Jap truck that I got some tires and stuff and put on, made myself a personal truck. Now, this is my friend Yoshio Shiga that I met him just a few days after we got to Japan.
Shiga was also a pilot. Flying a Zero, he led one of the first Japanese waves into Pearl Harbor.
I'd use this truck to go out and scout around to find some, souvenirs and stuff. And I found this new Japanese George. It was made by Kawanishi or Kawasaki, I believe. Some of the other guys went back with me, and we put the tail up on the back of this truck, pulled it back over to our squadron. And I couldn't read any of the instruments in there. I wanted to fly the airplane. So I told the guy at the interpreter's pool, I need a Japanese pilot to come put the labels on these switches and stuff. So they went and got me this guy.
With their governments no longer at war, Danaher and Shiga found a strong bond in aviation.
I mean, I went right in this guy's home, even though it was just 2 weeks later. I could see, heck, he was just a pilot just like I was.
The two former adversaries became fast and lifelong friends.
He and his wife had just had their first child. and they had no food to eat. I mean, they were really bad on nutrition. So I would take them food from our mess hall, and we became real good friends.
The Kawanishi N1K that Danaher pulled back to base eventually found its way to the United States.
Now, this is Shiga. When I brought that plane back, and he came down there and started it and labeled all the buttons and switches and things in there, and he got the pilot's handbook and wrote it out in longhand, in printing. You know, the airspeeds, graphs, and all that. And then they found 5 more of those back out in the boondocks where I found mine. And brought them down to the flight line. They painted stars and bars on the, painted the Jap meatballs out. And then they flew them back to Yokosuka Naval Air Station and put them on an aircraft carrier and bought them. So my plane is here in the States someplace now. But anyway, Shiga flew mine over there. And that's him with his flight gear on getting ready to leave.
Danaher took full advantage of his mobility. Armed with a camera, he toured the surrounding country in his scrounge truck, in his Hellcat, and on a motorcycle, a mode of transportation he purchased for several bottles of standard Navy-issue whiskey.
Here's some Jap kids, and they were all nice. I mean, of course, we had our propaganda too, saying, that they were beady-eyed and couldn't see anything, and that was all. Of course, we've learned that since that that's not true. Nagasaki, where the second bomb was dropped, was just south of our field. It was about 20 miles south of Omura. Of course, when we'd fly, we could go down and put our time in, flying an hour or two every few days. I flew down there and took these pictures of Nagasaki from the air. This building all along the river here is really what they were aiming at when they dropped the bomb. And they missed it about a mile. After this, I got on my motorcycle one day, and I rode it down there. And nobody said anything about this radiation. And I spent the whole day down there. This is about 2 or 3 weeks after the bomb was dropped.
Aviation's been Danaher's life since World War II. In Korea, he flew Corsairs. As a civilian, he has flown more aircraft than he can count. But he still fondly remembers the Hellcat.
It was an impressive airplane to me. It didn't look quite as clean as a Corsair, and when I started flying it, I found that to be true. It has, a thicker wing and seemed to have a little more wing area, but it was a much more comfortable airplane to fly. I like where you sat up kind of high and forward, particularly for night fighter work. It was better, but and it flew a lot like the Corsair, but it was actually an easier airplane to fly.
So easy, in fact, that the pilots had their own nickname for the plane.
We always claimed they were kind of a old grandpa's airplane. All of us that had been flying Corsairs, we didn't call them Hellcats, we called them house cats.
Tests showed the difficulty in the first remote control flying. The more stable an airframe, the better. When the first F6F Hellcat flew in 1942, the hopes of 20,000 Grumman employees rode with it.
I've been flying for a long time on paper, but this is the real thing.
Yeah, that's what I was going to.
Today, as this Hellcat prepares to fly, only a handful of people are there to notice. One of those is Tim Jackson. He's an airline pilot who volunteers his time to fly for the Confederate Air Force. Jackson will have the controls for this flight.
It won't come up until you reach this indicated speed. And
A lot of airplanes like that.
Even though he's an experienced Hellcat pilot, Jackson knows that no two planes are exactly alike.
I asked Nelson if we could strap in a fire extinguisher somewhere, portable.
Okay.
While it's still on the ground, he focuses on learning everything he can about this aircraft. An aircraft he's never seen before today. Ken Shugart, the one person who knows every nuance of this Hellcat, answers his questions.
You know, if you'd lose the engine-driven fuel pump, then of course you got the Mongolian steam engine.
Thousands of dollars and hours have gone into this Hellcat, along with a personal effort too large to measure. So flying this plane carries a great deal of responsibility with it.
People put their trust in me to go do it properly, and that's really rewarding for me. And I want to go out and do it right and make sure the airplane's flyable for everybody to see. We can take it to air shows and let everybody enjoy it as much as I enjoy it. But let's make sure.
Jackson extends his vigilance to his pre-flight walk around.
Well, you look for the obvious things to make sure all the parts are there, and I go into the wheel wells and make sure that the gear systems look like it should work. You know, that it's greased up and everything's in position. There's no hydraulic leaks, things like that. I check the hydraulic system really well because it makes the gear up and go up and down. It runs the flaps in this airplane, and just quick, thorough pre-flight on that. Make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to. And then, of course, the engine is important. You can look it over, but you don't know until you actually start it up and do a good takeoff on it, and that'll tell you if it's going to run right or not for you.
Until Jackson has become thoroughly familiar with the Hellcat, both inside the cockpit and out, he approaches the flight gingerly.
With guarded optimism, I didn't want to get too excited, because I had never seen the airplane before. I didn't know anything about it for the most part other than what people have told me. But when I got here and saw what great shape it was in, I really started getting excited about having the opportunity to fly it, considering myself lucky to fly it, as a matter of fact.
The Hellcat is a single-seat aircraft, but Jackson won't be flying alone. A Confederate Air Force helldiver joins him to fly chase. One final run-up of the engine, and it's time to depart. Like all the Hellcats before it, this plane has a promising future. But just like that first Hellcat, it must start with a successful test flight.
This is what I've been waiting for. That first big chance to do my stuff. No more time to be nervous now. Worried? Hey, not a bit. I'm darn sure. There are 40,000 reasons why I'm so sure. Those 40,000 parts that make me the Hellcat.
Breckenridge 17 will be remaining over the airport at altitude for a little while.
Jackson pulls onto the runway behind the helldiver, adds power, and takes to the sky. For all the anticipation, the takeoff is uneventful, the true mark of success in aviation.
70, you get a really good verbal clean.
Now it's time for some basic tests. During the flight, Jackson will keep the Hellcat over the airport. That ensures a quick landing if problems arise. As his hands and feet fly the plane, Jackson's eyes continually scan the instruments. they could provide one of the first indications of trouble.
Well, the lifeblood of the airplane basically is your engine oil and oil pressure, so I spend most of my time, watching that every 30 seconds or so, looking over at it, make sure it's where it's supposed to be. Flying the airplane is just flying an airplane, keeping the speed up, keeping the level pointed where you want to go, but if that oil pressure starts dropping, the oil temperature starts going up, you need to make a decision to get it back on the ground before it gets worse.
The chase pilot provides a pair of eyes outside the plane. That's no small thing during a flight like this. Knowing that your flaps and ailerons and especially your landing gear are working right is a big deal. On the ground, Shugart and the crew are just as attentive, but all they can do from here is listen carefully on a handheld radio.
And it's kind of hard to see him here with the sun on the other side. Looks like it's pretty much wings level, too.
Nelson probably agree with this, but most of the test flights are, it's harder to stand on the ground and watch them than it is be in the air.
I'll slow it down and do a little bit of a stall.
Just one of the tests Jackson performs is a stall.
Solid brake at 55.
A stall shows Jackson how the plane will handle on landing. It also tells him if the airspeed indicator is accurate. He wants no surprises when he brings the Hellcat back to Earth.
Yeah, it'll work in a little bit.
Just as Shugart predicted, everything works as Grumman designed it to in 1944. After half an hour in the air, Jackson is satisfied that the Hellcat is airworthy.
Yeah, it's really straightforward. It flies real nice. It tracks straight. It lands nicely. Nice and slow. It doesn't have a tendency to wobble on you or go in a direction you don't want it to go on landing. It really is a nice airplane.
His test's over. He brings the Hellcat in for a perfect three-point landing.
All right. All three of them at the same time. Hey, it flew. Yeah, that was great. You guys did wonderful. Yeah.
You did all the work.
This is real thrilling to see it, finally get done and flying. A lot of work and a lot of dedicated people, and I get the fun part of the whole thing, which is kind of neat. But I sure do appreciate their excellent work that they put into it.
That's a beauty.
All I can say is I'm a lucky guy to get to fly an airplane like this.
Tried and tested, fit as only a Hellcat is.
And ready to carry on the Hellcat legacy.
It's been around a while and people are really excited to see it fly. And I know a lot of work went into it and they did a great job because it's, no squawks on the airplane. It's running really well. I don't see any reason that it shouldn't run for a long time.